Hey, happy Friday, and thanks for joining me. I'm Carla with Race to Walk, and it is time for our weekly Bible study. And today we are going to be going over the prologue of John in John chapter 1, when he's talking about the Word and the Logos. And also we're going to be talking a little bit about Jehovah's Witnesses, their error in belief about that particular passage, and how they came to that and how we should address it. But before we get started a little bit about this Bible study. I do a weekly Bible study every Friday at noon Central on Instagram Live, and then a little bit later I post that on YouTube at Race to Walk TV. And what we are doing in this Bible study is we're actually following the 1-year chronological Bible reading plan, which this is a print version of it, but you can also get it on YouVersion, the Bible app. And I do have a post on my blog, racetowalk.org. So if you go to racetowalk.org and just search for the 1-year chronological Bible, I explain the reading plan, what it is, how it's different from your standard Bible, and then also how you can follow along on YouVersion if you'd like to do so. So there are set readings for each day, and so each week I pick a passage from the previous week's reading and we just have a little chat about it. So this week was a shift, wasn't it, if you've been following along? So we finished up the Old Testament in Malachi and Joel this past week, and we started the New Testament and the birth of Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, this is just a side comment, this isn't our actual Bible study. They put Joel as the very last one, and to me it just kind of felt wrong there. They don't have a specific dating for it, and so that's why they put it where it was. We had ended with Esther, and I talked about how she kind of set the stage so that while the Jews were being rebuilding the temple, there was this effort to annihilate all the Jews through Haman's decree. And then after Esther, Nehemiah was serving under Xerxes, successor Artaxerxes, and he was allowed to go back and rebuild the wall. So that's the whole thing with Nehemiah. So they believe that Joel was after Nehemiah went back to Persia. They're not sure. That's why they put it there. If you read it, it kind of felt like there was a disaster, and so Joel was speaking to them through that, and then he was saying, when the day of the Lord comes, it's going to be worse, so you better get yourselves right. The part of the reason I think it bothers me is that Jesus actually says, he talks about the prophets, and that the Word of God actually, and the Tanakh went to Malachi. So anyway, but that's just a side note. I mean, they just put it there because they didn't quite know exactly where the dating was. But then we started in the New Testament on, I think it was Tuesday, right? And it started with the birth of Jesus. So this was kind of interesting. Again, I'm going to be going over John chapter 1, but one of the things, I just want to mention this. I've read I've read over the passages of Jesus' birth several times and looked at the different occurrences and who is in the different roles people played. But I never noticed this until I read the passages this week, because they're interspersed with, so Mark and Matthew and Luke are interspersed for timing, and it talks about that Mary went to see so Elizabeth. The angel appears to Zachariah that his son he's going to have a son. His wife has been barren, and that the son is going to be the forerunner of the Messiah. Zachariah questions him. He's made mute. Elizabeth conceives, and she's pregnant for 6 months, and then the angel appears to Mary and says that she will conceive by the Holy Spirit. And so then after that, she goes and visits Elizabeth for 3 months, right? So almost to the time when John was born. And then after that is a passage of the angel appearing to Joseph and Mary. So it never occurred to me until just this week when I was reading it that Mary was out of the city for 3 months, and she comes back and she's pregnant. So that probably added a little bit to the incredulity of Joseph, like, Yeah, so what was really going on there while you were visiting your cousin? So that's just a side note. That's not what we're going to be talking about today, but we are going to be covering John chapter 1. So I want to talk a little bit about the Gospel of John. I did mention this in my Bible study about a month or so ago on Isaiah 61 about the book of John. So just if you didn't watch that one, just to recap. So we have 4 Gospels, which are about the life of Jesus. They were written by different people, and each of them has a little bit different perspective, but 3 of the Gospels are known as the Synoptics, and they're very similar, and that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And that is because there's a lot of common material in each of them, in each of the 3 Synoptics. So I think there's very strong evidence that Mark was the first one written, and that Matthew and Luke took Mark's gospel and used that as kind of an outline for theirs, and then added their own material and used it for for their own message. That's not. There's some people who disagree and think that Matthew was the first one. I don't think that the evidence is as strong, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing. I'm just letting you know if you want to explore that a little bit more, you can. But I personally believe that Mark was the first one written for a lot of different reasons. So based on that, like Mark would have been the first, then Matthew and Luke were written sometime after that. Now, Mark was the companion of Peter, so Mark's account is Peter's. What Peter taught in Peter's preaching. Matthew was an apostle. He was a tax collector, so some people believe that maybe he was taking notes at the time. As possible, we don't know. And then Luke was not an apostle, but he was a companion of Paul on some of his trips, and he wrote the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. So it's kind of like part 1 and part 2. Like we tell our kids in our 3rd grade Sunday school class, Acts is the only book of history in the New Testament. So with that, Acts ends with Paul in prison in Rome. And so if it wasn't written about that time, you would think that there would have been something written, if it was written later, that there would have been a little bit more exposition about the fate of Paul. Paul was actually martyred in Rome believes to be martyred in Rome under Nero when the persecution started, along with Peter. So that is kind of the terminus point for Luke, just using common sense. So that was around 64, 65 AD, somewhere around there, which was before the destruction of the temple. Now, John not only was the last gospel to be written, but it was the last book of the Bible to be written, which sounds a little crazy. So when you read the Gospel of John, it's very, very different from the other synoptics. And for a long time, I felt like I thought to me that the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD was such a major traumatic event. It would be like, there's really not even a comparison of it. It would be sort of like someone demolishing the White House, sort of, but not even really. It doesn't, you can't even, not only was it the capital of the nation, but it was the center of their identity as God's people. I mean, you can't even compare what a huge traumatic event that was. It was actually on the 9th of Av, and there was through history, there were a number of calamities that happened on that day, and so that's still a day that's observed in Judaism. So then John was written probably almost close to the turn of the century, so maybe around 95, 96 AD, and so I always felt like, okay, well, if it wasn't written before, then you would think he would have mentioned the destruction of the temple, right? And he doesn't. None of them do. But when I was thinking about it, so John he had been, there teaching, preaching. There's accounts in the early church, the writings of the early church fathers, that said he lived to a great age. And there's people who were contemporaries of these apostles that were taught by the apostles themselves that we still have the writings from. And a really great resource, if you want to look any of those up, it's called the Ante-Nicene Fathers. There was a whole, I think it's like 10-volume set that by Philip Schaff, which was written, I think, translated, I think, in like the 1800s, but there's been different editions. And someday I'd like to get a full set of this, but it's actually, if you actually buy a set, it's actually pretty spendy. But you can go to ccel.org, and not only do they have the Ante-Nicene Fathers and the Post-Nicene Fathers, but they have pretty much every significant theological writing up into that's out of copyright. So any writer that you want to know about, any writing about Christianity, you can go to that, and you just go for free. When I was in graduate school, I was quoting from that site all the time. A lot of my A's I owe to that library of information, because I could just go and anything that I wanted to look up as far as like the early church writings, they have it accessible, really easily available to research, and it's not behind a paywall. It's great. So anyway, going back to John, he lived to a great age, and he was preaching, and there's a story that they tried to kill him and they couldn't. They tried to martyr him, and so they put him on the island of Patmos in exile. And then after the Roman emperor that put him there died, then he left the island and went to Ephesus, and that's where he lived out the rest of his life, and he wrote the Gospel of John. So he wrote the book of Revelation, based on the vision that he had while he was on the island of Patmos. So John comes after that. So when I was thinking about that, it made me think, okay, so John, he had this vision maybe 20-some years after the destruction of the temple. It would be like us writing about 9/11 now. So there's been some space and some time, even though it was a very traumatic event. But then, in addition to that, he has literally just seen the end of the world, and he's written this vision of things he doesn't even have words to describe. And then, so he's just had this happen. He's been in this place of probably a lot of quiet and peace on the island of Patmos, and then he leaves and he goes to Ephesus, and he's in the church there. And this is true of any group of people. We're all sinners saved by grace, and we're works in progress. We're the Holy Spirit's works in progress, and it's kind of like potty training sometimes. Sometimes the sanctification process can be a little messy. So he goes into Ephesus, and can you just imagine all the drama and people, all the little power struggles. I guess that's just the way people are, right? And then he writes, so he's had this end of the world vision, and he comes into people that are, this church, and the people are so focused on these minor things, and he's just like, okay, he writes the book of John. So next time you go read John, keep that in mind. Keep what John has been through and think about what he's really saying. Now, a lot of people will say, for new Christians, they will say, start with the book of John and then just keep reading, because the book of John really shows God's heart and his love for people, and Jesus' compassion for people too. So now, as far as John's topics, he comes back, and this has been, Jesus died and ascended in 30 AD. This has been probably about 60, 65 years since that time, and the church has spread, and a lot of the apostles have been martyred. And so there's the church itself as an entity moving from those apostles. They are kind of standing kind of on their own, right? And so, you see this through all of Paul's letters. I mean, even in the first years of the church, there were misunderstandings and some false teachers, because we wouldn't have anything in the New Testament beyond the Gospels if there hadn't been all this drama, because that's what the letters that Paul, specifically Paul, wrote to the different churches is like, okay, get it together, shape up, and explaining things so that, making things clear. So John comes in, Paul's dead, Peter's dead, so they don't have those first-hand witnesses anymore. And John comes back, and he sees some things that have come in the church. And so when I read the book of John, you can kind of tell a lot of the issues that were taking place in the church as a whole when he wrote it. So this is just a simple example. At the very end of John, he gives an account of of Jesus appearing to some of the disciples. It was him and Peter. And this is when Jesus says to Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter said, you know I do. He said, "Feed my sheep." And he asked him this 3 times because Peter had denied him 3 times. So he's asking him, and then he tells him, "You're going to end your life in chains." And he's like, it's like Jesus was telling him, you have to be sure that you know the cost, because this is what's waiting for you. It's not going to be easy. He told him he was going to be martyred. And so then in John's account, Peter says, "Well, what about him?" pointing to John, and Jesus said, "What is it to you if he lives again till I return?" It's like John makes clear that, so obviously there was this rumor going around that John would not die until Jesus returned. And John, at the end of his gospel, says, no, that's not what he said. What he said was, "What is it to you?" So that was just one of the little misconceptions and misunderstandings. The other thing that seems really clear to me about, like when I'm reading the account of the day Jesus died, was that John really stresses, he doesn't even really go into a huge amount of detail about, his trial. What he really stresses is the focus on the Sabbaths, because I think there had already at that time started to get a little bit misunderstanding about which Sabbath was being referred to, as far as this is the day before the Sabbath, but I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole other story. But the other things that he really focuses on are some more persistent heresies, and these are things that we even see today, and that is the Judaizers, which believe that you have to follow the law in order to be saved. I mean, he really focuses on the work of the cross. And then also there was the heresy of Docetism, and what that is that they didn't believe that Jesus was really human. So some of them didn't believe that he just appeared to be human, but he wasn't actually. And there were different forms. And this actually continued for quite a while. This kind of developed into fuller sort of mess of Gnosticism. I mean, you can't really say that Gnostics had one single belief, because they believed it was just, there was no coherence in what they believed of it. They believed all different things. So anyway, so those were 2 things. Now, this is in the prologue of John. It talks about, I'm going to read it, and we're going to talk a little bit about what he was saying, and then also we're going to go over, like how the Jews of that day would have understood it, and then also we're going to see how this is kind of like a linchpin in the false beliefs of the Jehovah's Witnesses. So anyway, we're going to go here in John chapter 1 and reading verses 1 through 18. And this was in the daily reading plan, this is from September 24th. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which gives light to every man coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, but of the will of man, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness of him and cried out, saying, This was he of whom I said, He who comes after me is preferred before me, for he was before me. And of his fullness we have all received, and grace for grace. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. So there is a lot in this, and one of the things I'm going to read something else, a commentary on this passage. And as I was reading this, I think that if you have studied like Gnosticism, like there's a lot of people who, will look at these Gnostic Gospels that came about and that were written in the 2nd century after Christ and say, well, this was actually true Christianity, when, it postdates it, and it was, there's not any support for it as far as in the early church, but they're really big into light, right? And so John is speaking to that, and he's explaining that the true light is God. It's not, we are not God. He's arguing against pantheism. He's arguing against this Christ consciousness that, the New Age claims that, it's this spark is within all of us. We are all God. That's kind of become a little bit more prominent as people have been talking about it a little more since Marianne Williamson ran for, I'm not even sure if she's still in the running, but she's been running for president, and that's one of the things she says. We're all God. Well, we're not. And John's very clearly identifying in this passage that the light is separate. He is our light, but he's separate from us. So I'm going to go into a little bit, a commentary on this, but I think first of all, we're going to talk about what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe. So everybody is familiar with the Jehovah's Witnesses because they're one of the few groups that, and you have to give them this, they believe that they have the truth, and so they have a mission of trying to bring people to the truth that they think that they have. They'll go knocking on doors. I had a professor in my world religions class, and he loves it when the Jehovah's Witnesses come and knock on his door, and he'll invite them in, and he takes them through John chapter 1 and pointing out in the Greek that, their interpretation of their translation of the Bible is not correct. So just to get into that, so I'm going to share a book here. This is The Kingdom of the Cults. This is by Walter Martin. He was actually the original the Bible Answer Man. He started the Christian Research Institute. He wrote a number of books, especially refuting different cults. And there's another book that I have of his that talks about it's called The Kingdom of the Occult. But these are, this book covers, Christian cults. So they are beliefs that kind of come out of Christianity, but they pervert some core doctrines. And he goes over quite a few of them in this book. This was originally published in 1965. And the longest chapter he spends is actually on Jehovah's Witnesses. And when I read this, you can just almost tell, he's just exasperated as he's writing this. So the Jehovah's Witnesses were originally known as the Watchtower Society, and it was founded by Charles T. Russell. And I think the date is maybe 1870. They had his own little group. So when he was first made pastor of his own congregation, he was only 18, and he had already decided that, everybody was wrong, and that he was totally against organized religions. And you see a lot of people that say that today. And here's the thing. I mean, that is, when you see somebody say something like that, the first thing that should be a warning flag. Sit there and probe a little bit to see exactly what they're saying, but that should be a flag of, they think that out of 2,000 years, they're the only ones that has had the true answer. I mean, that is just so prideful and arrogant. There are almost no words for it. I mean, really, really. So it almost puts that person above God, because what they're saying is that God is not capable of preserving his church and his truth and his spirit through his church until they came along. That's ridiculous. The other thing, too, is that, people will say, well, I'm not into religion, I'm just into relationship. Okay. Again, Christianity, you're not saved because you follow a bunch of rules. You're saved because you've made Jesus the Lord of your life, and you've made him you acknowledge him as your Savior. And you believe in that his work on the cross that's who you have your salvation in. However, words have meaning, right? And so when we say we are a Christian, what we're saying is that we believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father but through him. That is the primary doctrine of the church. We believe that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and that he rose again on the third day. That's the doctrine of the church. We believe that the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are of the same essence. That's the doctrine of the church. These are a collection of beliefs that when we say we're Christians, that we are communicating that to people. So when you say that you're like, I'm not against organized religion, basically what you're saying is, I don't believe what anybody tells me other than what I think, and you're essentially centering truth in yourself, which again is very arrogant and prideful. So, I understand what people mean by that, but watch your words, because we do have a set of beliefs, and if we don't know what those are, then we can get into some pretty serious problems. So, like in the Jehovah's Witnesses, their history is that there was a teenager that thought, that he knew more than everybody else, and he was very good at propaganda and pretty much scamming people. That's the truth. So, anyway, so then in, I think it was 1950, so he died, I don't remember where it says, but he died. There are other people that became presidents of this society, and they renamed it to the Jehovah's Witnesses. So, anyway, Walter Martin, if you want to know the foundation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, this is a great book to get, because he goes into great detail outlining just how dishonest and fraudulent Russell was. I mean, he goes into, he has this, what he says specifically here is, the society has become a great disseminator of propaganda and a challenge to the zeal of every Christian. So, he talks, I'm not going to get into the whole thing. The whole thing is an interesting read. But anyway, so Russell was very, again, like a prideful and arrogant person. He was very he was very litigious. He sued people all the time. And there was a pastor that pretty much just eviscerated him and said, he's not a scholar, he's not immorally upright, and there was evidence for all of these things. And Russell sued him for libel, and so they had to go to court over it. And so Russell pretty much proved that the pastor that was saying these things was true. He goes into, Martin gives an account of, in this trial, and there's transcripts of the trial, and Martin actually gives references, so, if anybody is interested, they can go and look it up. But the attorney asks, okay, I'm just going to read this because I think this is interesting. So the question, this is the attorney asking Russell this, the founder of the Watchtower Society. Do you know the Greek alphabet? Answer, oh yes. Question, can you tell me the correct letters if you see them? Answer, some of them, I might make a mistake on some of them. Question, would you tell me the names of those on the top page? Page 44, have I got here? Answer, well, I don't know that I would be able to. Not asking what the word is or to translate it, just asking what the letters are. Question, you can't tell what those letters are? Look at them and see if you know. Russell, my way, and then he was arrested. So I guess Russell has his own way of translating Greek. Question, are you familiar with the Greek language? Russell, no. So he couldn't even identify the Greek letters. So here's the thing. I mentioned this a few months ago. I started the Biblical Languages program at HBU, and so I'm taking Biblical Greek right now. And the very first, so day one is an overview of the Greek language, right? Like the history of it. And the second day is you need to know the alphabet, all of them, including the transliteration. So if you don't know the letters of the alphabet, you know literally nothing. So that was the one thing. So then the Jehovah's Witnesses have their own Bible translation. It was published in 1950. So this is actually after the founder died, and I think there's several presidents in. And the person who was the main, so they had supposedly a committee, but according to, now this actually isn't included in this book. This was published in 1965, and since that time, there have been people who left the society that knew, like, they've identified the people that were on the committee, and the head of the committee was Frederick Franz. And he also, this was in a court case, he was asked by an attorney to translate Genesis 2:4. So he says so first of all, the attorney asked him if he knew, these languages. He said, oh yes, I know all these languages. And then the attorney asked him to translate Genesis 2:4, which is in Hebrew, and he couldn't do it. So he doesn't know, he knows nothing. It's just as big of a fraud as Russell. And then there was the nephew of this man, the head of the committee, and other people on the committee have said that this man, Frederick Franz, was the main translator of the New World Translation. And his nephew, so they believe this. They believe what they were being taught, but they were supposed to be studying and writing for their tracts. And so when they had a question, he would go to his uncle and he would say, okay, well, how do I interpret this? And he would send this head of the committee, who's claimed to be, that did this translation, he would send them to, like, traditional commentaries to determine what a verse actually meant. And he said it was just really kind of shocking to him, and he realized that, it took some time, but he realized that what they were being taught wasn't true. So this is just that's just a little overview. Again, if you want more information on it, he has a whole chapter on, and he just goes, sometimes it seems like he's going a little bit too in detail, but you can tell that he's had a lot of encounters with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so he knows the responses. Now, this was like in 1965, so they may have changed some or have had different answers from them, but I'm going to go to actually what real Greek scholars say about John 1. So this is actually in the Basics of Biblical Greek by Bill Mounts, and this is the book that we're using for Greek 1. And they'll have in the beginning of each chapter, they'll have a little thing about exegesis, which is pretty cool. This is a commentary by Gary M. Burge, and he's talking about John chapter 1. So he writes, a casual first century reader of the 4th Gospel's prologue, John 1:1-18, would have little difficulty understanding John's description of the Logos. As a concept, it was simple enough. Logos was the intelligible law of things. Logos to Theos was God's transcendent rationality that gave the universe order and purpose. A Hellenized Jew would quickly reach for a volume of wisdom literature explaining that God's wisdom, his word or logos, provided the universe with its form and coherence. As such, a logo to Theos was foreign to human ways, above us and distant from us, guiding us from afar. John 1:14, on the other hand, would make any such reader pause in stunned silence, and the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. It is the earthly sphere, the area of human decisions and emotions, human history, and human sinfulness. John 1:14 contains the risk, the scandal, and the gospel of the Christian faith. The center of God's life and thought entered the depths of our world and took up its form, its flesh, in order to be known by us and to save us. This affirmation about Logos was the very heart of our faith. God has not abandoned us. No lowliness, no misery, no sinfulness is beyond God's comprehension and reach. He came among us, embraced our world in his incarnation, and loved us. It is easy enough to say that God loves the world, John 3:16, but to say that God loves me in my frailty and faithfulness, that he loves us the world, is another matter. This is a mystery and the power of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. So this is what he didn't mention this here, and I thought he had. This was actually the Logos. There was a whole philosophical belief about the Logos that Philo, who was a Jewish philosopher, about the same time. So this was a common idea. It wasn't like John just making up something. He was taking this common knowledge, and he was course correcting it and explaining how Jesus is the Logos. So the other part is, now this is actually from Greek when we're just starting getting into cases. So for me personally, I took Spanish in high school, but I didn't actually get a mastery of it. So I did take Latin when I was in the apologetics program, and if you've taken any of the Romance languages, you know that they're inflected and they have case endings, right? So this is another commentary about the case endings and how it gives the indication and basically disproves the Jehovah's Witnesses' position about it. Because what they'll say is, in their New World Translation, they complained that the word was a God, not that the word was of God. And so that is what this is discussing. So this is a little bit longer, but it says the nominative case is a case that the subject is in. So each word will have a little bit, the ending will be a little different. When the subject takes an equative verb like is, the verb that equates the subject with something else, then another noun also appears in the nominative case. So basically it's equating the subject of the sentence with this other word. The predicate nominative. In the sentence, John is a man, John is the subject and man is the predicate nominative. In English, the subject and predicate nominative are distinguished by word order. The subject comes first. Not so in Greek. Since word order in Greek is quite flexible and is used for emphasis rather than for strict grammatical functions, other means are used to distinguish subject from predicate nominative. For example, if one of the two nouns has the article, it is the subject. As we have seen, word order is employed specifically for the sake of emphasis. Generally speaking, when a word is thrown to the front of the clause, it is done so for emphasis. When a predicate nominative is thrown in front of the verb, by virtue of word order, it takes on emphasis. A good illustration of this is John 1:1. Awesome. Hey, so Debbie Elaine said, my children and I are reading John together, so what you're saying is so interesting. So let me finish reading this, and then let me see if I can connect this. So just give me a second. I haven't done that before, so we'll see if that works. Okay. So But in Greek, the word order has been reversed. It reads, Ke theos enos logos. Okay, and God was the Word. We know that the Word is a subject because it has the article, and we translate it accordingly, and the Word was God. Two questions with theological import should come to mind. Why was theos thrown forward? And two, why does it lack the article? In brief, its emphatic position stresses its essence or quality. What God was, the Word was, is how one translation brings out this force. Its lack of article keeps us from identifying the person of the Word, Jesus Christ, with the person of God, the Father. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? That is to say, the word order tells us that Jesus Christ has all the divine attributes that the Father has. Lack of the article tells us that Jesus Christ is not the Father. John's wording is beautifully compact. It is, in fact, one of the most elegantly terse theological statements one could ever find. As Martin Luther said, the lack of the article is against Sabellianism. The word order is against Arianism. So what that is Sabellianism is basically modalism. Some people believe, and this is actually in some different, you would be surprised how many people believe this. They don't believe in the Trinity. They believe that God took different forms at different times, the Father, Son, and the Spirit. That's Sabellianism or modalism. Arianism is where they didn't believe that God was, they believed he was divine, but they didn't believe that he was Yahweh, that he was of the same essence. Okay. So, this ends us out. To state this another way, look at how the different Greek constructions would be rendered. Ke o logos and o theos. And the word was God, i.e. the Father. That would be Sabellianism. Kai o logos and theos. And the word was a God, Arianism, which that's actually how the Jehovah's Witnesses translate it in their Bible. And kai theos and os logos, and the word was God, and that's the Orthodox belief. Jesus Christ is God and has all the attributes that the Father has, but he is not the first person of the Trinity, and this is concisely affirmed in Ke theos and o logos. Hey, so I just wanted to do a little bit of wrap up for the Bible study. We went into, after I finished this last part, we went into a live discussion with Debbie Elaine. So that's kind of a different part. So I just wanted to wrap up here. So anyway, just to recap, we were doing John chapter 1, and the two books that I read from, the one was from The Basics of Biblical Greek by Bill Mounce, and you can go to his website, billmounce.com, and he has a lot of really great resources if you're interested in learning Greek, just self-directed. And then the other book was, I guess I put it away already, it was A Kingdom of the Cults by Walter Martin. And so either of those resources, if you want to go and read for yourself things that I was talking about, I think if you have something that you really care about that's Jehovah's Witness, or if you just want to be better prepared when they come knocking at your door, don't go hide and just answer them by ring, but just invite them in and be ready to have a conversation with them. So anyway, so that's enough about that. And so I just want to share a little bit of an answered prayer, because last week I mentioned that, our community had flooding from Imelda, and I mentioned that, I noticed that some people were having a hard time letting other people help them, get all cleaned up. So I had asked for prayer for our community and also for people that were having a hard time letting people help them. And I just want to give you an update on that, because on Sunday, we went out to a house and to help some people pack up, because they were moving out of a house that had flooded, and they had already done a ton of work and tore out the carpet and moved a bunch of things, but there was still a lot of stuff to box up. And so I helped the mother of the lady that lived there pack up her room, which is kind of like her space, in this family's house. And she said before, as I was leaving, she said, I just really didn't want anybody to come. I didn't want anybody in among my stuff. And she said, I just realized I had to let
people helped me, and I was like, wow, it just seemed like just 2 days before we had prayed for that. So if you were one of the people that prayed for my prayer request, thank you very much. I just wanted to let you know that God did answer those prayers. So thank you for that, and I will see you next week. We'll see, just keep up with your reading. We're in the New Testament. Things are getting exciting, aren't they? So I am just praying the blessing and favor of God over you, and I'll see you next week.